Welcome to Lee Domingue's podcast, where he shares stories and teaches principles behind why and how your legacy starts today.
Hey everyone, welcome to Legacy Starts Today, where we're passionate about living with purpose and starting our legacy today. I've got a treat for you, all of the listeners today. I've got my great friend, really a privilege. This guy's a great business leader that's had decades of business experience, or let me qualify that, successful business experience, because that's very important. David Metter as our guest today. David actually serves as executive director of Legacy Builders at 12 Stone Church in Georgia. And Legacy Builders, whether it's named Kingdom Builders or Legacy Team or Vision Builders, Legacy Builders is where they help business people connect to their purpose inside the context of a local church to actually fulfill what God has gifted them to do with the gift of giving, the gift of being generous over and above the tithe. And David is someone who has tremendous wisdom. We've become great friends. And when I first met him, we've got some similarities and some passion for the automotive industry and some history there. But what an amazing church that he's a part of. Pastors Kevin Myers that founded the church, and now Jason Berry, who is the co-lead pastor, as well as they're transitioning over the next year or two. An incredible church. If you're ever in the state of Georgia, you need to visit a 12 Stone location. But both Kevin and Jason, tremendous leaders, love them a ton, just have built an amazing work that's making a difference, not only in Georgia, but around the world. And just really grateful for them and grateful for the 12 Stone family as well. But David, also has this tremendous background in business. Yes, he's in ministry now, but he spent most of his life in business, been really an innovative leader with over 20 years experience. And I wrote some notes down in the automotive retail industry, the technology industry, as well as marketing. He's founded and grown businesses in highly competitive markets, including Fortune 100 companies, and is consistently successful in refocusing both startups as well as top-tiered organizations through strategic goals. So he's worked with dreamers who are starting things up, that are entrepreneurs at the core, that are risking everything because they believe in this thing and they want to see their baby come to fruition, and as well as mature companies as well. So he's got this broad amount of experience. So welcome, David, my friend. We're excited to hear from you today, and I'm just honored that you would take the time to join me on Legacy Starts Today.
Wow, I am so excited to be here. And as you were talking about it, I'm like, who's that dude? Like, I don't even know him. But I love how you said years of experience and success. I think years of experience is good. The success, it's funny how people remember things, right? And as you know, building businesses, you can have a lot of failures, and then you have that moment of success. And that's, what you're known for. But all of those years of experience and failures and that lead to that moment of success is amazing. And so I appreciate and am humbled by your words. Yeah. So thank you for having me here.
You bet. John Maxwell said this in a one time I was meeting with him, and he talked about the return, not on investment, but the return on failure. And there is a return, because I think failure keeps us grounded. Failure keeps us humble. Failure teaches us things sometimes, if we won't quit, teaches us things that honestly success all the time doesn't teach. And so I think it helps us to become better if we keep our heart right. And, it's people do remember the successes, but do they really understand the road that it took to actually go through that to get you where you're at today? Why don't you share with us? I want to get into a couple of things. I want to get into your journey and your story, because I think it's the journey in life that makes you. And I think when you walk through something and you've learned something and then you're living it, I think God gives you an authority in that area. And I think the anointing of God really flows in that area. We can't do everything and can't be successful at everything. But I think when we learn something and then we actually live it and then we give it away, God puts an X factor of increase and impact. But tell us about your journey from attending church, starting to tithe. That's all new for you to getting to the place where you're giving above and beyond your tithe. Because most people don't even tithe, 10% of their gross income. But you got that principle. And then not only that, but giving you and your wife, Lonnie, giving over and above your tithe as well. And then ultimately finding your spiritual gift and calling right in your local church. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So we started attending 12 Stone about almost 15 years ago. And I remember we had moved from Maryland back down to Atlanta and came from a pretty conservative church up there. And I remember the first time that I came into 12 Stone, I was dressed in a suit. My wife jokes and says that I was in a 3-piece suit, but I never owned a 3-piece suit. But I remember walking in and I was just enamored. They had a Starbucks in the lobby, and I walk in and the music hits me in a way that I've never experienced in church before. And eventually I was talked out of my suit and started wearing jeans like everyone else, at 12 Stone, and was excited by that. But we were a few years in, and I thought I was tithing. Like I'd hear PK talk, through some of his sermons about giving of the tithe. And I remember being out with one of my 12 Stone buddies one time, and he kind of called me out. He said, are you a giver or are you a tither? And I go, I'm a tither. And he goes, are you really? And he challenged me. And I went home that night and I was a little upset. And I remember having the conversation with my wife, Lonnie, about it. And we're like, oh, we're not tithers, we're givers. And we were in a season, we had just started our last company and we were bootstrapping, right? I mean, we didn't have anything, and we had kids in high school. We had one kid in college, and things were tight. But I just remember the press that we had in that moment to start tithing, and we had to trust God in a time that it was tough. But I remember the joy that it brought us, and as we continued to tithe, we just experienced God's goodness in a lot of things, including our business and our family and the kids and all of these things that just were happening. And we saw that when we were obedient, God was just going to open up a lot of doors for us, which then led us to giving above the tithe and flexing what we finally understood as, our spiritual gift of giving.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. How's your experience? Many times people think, well, I'm giving 10% of my gross income, but it's 2% to my church and 8% to 20 other organizations outside of my church. And that's really, biblically, that's not tithing. I mean, you're being generous, and that's amazing. I remember I had a business guy one time came up to me and he said, hey, I'm about to sell my business, and I know you've gone through some liquidity moments in your life, and what do I do? I want to tithe and be obedient. And so then he mapped out his strategy in these different areas. And I was quiet, and I said, because I'm not going to push anybody. I don't want it to be people living under a law of, I want it to be, because when you're generous, I mean, it just brings a freedom. And you'll never know that real freedom until you actually are generous. And I think God's wired us that way. But he mapped out this plan of what what do you think about this? And I said, you really don't want to know what I think about it, because you qualified it as saying, hey, I'm a tither and I want to return to the Lord, this, and this is how I'm going to do it. I said, you probably really don't know what I think, or even more important, what I did. And I said, I wrote that check really fast, because my mind was wondering, it's one thing to write a check for $100. It's another thing to write a check for $1 million. But I looked at it and he goes, no, I really want to know. And I said, well, you're not really tithing. Tithing is returning 10% of your gross income to the Lord. And then all other giving over that is really generosity. And it's really where you're actually becoming generous. So he's like, wow. He goes, well, I'm giving 10%, maybe even 11. I said, that's great. I said, but you're not tithing. And so if you're wanting to know what I did, is I returned 10% of my gross income. And then all those other things that you are passionate about, they're amazing. They're blessing. That's awesome. But fund those out of your over and above giving. And he sat back and he looked and he kind of thought about it. And he's like, well, I go, yeah, I'm actually going to close my deal this afternoon. And this guy closed his deal. And I remember seeing on a giving report, the next giving report that came out, and it was a number that came out and it was like down to the pennies. And I was just blown away. I was like, man, he actually tithed. And he did. He tithed off of his sale of a company. And God's blessing him tremendously with other businesses and other things that he's doing. But he was just faithful in it. And I don't know why people have this, they have this mindset of, no, I'm going to wait and give God the leftovers. And it's a mindset too, I think, of someone who's trying to fulfill the vision, or really they become their own source rather than God becoming the source. He blesses what he owns, not what we just dedicate. And I've heard your story. I've heard some of, in business, but and how you've been very generous. But I think if people could get not only the tithing principle, but tap into a generous spirit of giving over and above, everything changes. There's a fulfillment that comes out of then what we're doing for a living, and it's just a tremendous blessing. Well, share with me and our listeners just what were some of the businesses. We talk automotive retail, technology, marketing, but what were some of the businesses, one or two of your businesses? Explain what they were and some of what you did.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't prepared to do that, but I'll warm it up a little bit by telling you our last business that we owned, that we built, was in the automotive industry, and it connected online buyers when they were starting their search of vehicles, and it incentivized them to come into a dealership. So it connected that online process to in-dealership process. And we did it in a number of different ways. But so like when you buy stuff on Amazon, following attribution on Amazon is super easy. You search, you click, you buy, it shows up. Everyone knows what you just did, right? In the auto industry, you don't know, because you do all this stuff online and then you have to go to a physical location and you can't attribute that success. And through this solution that we built, it was kind of the Trojan horse for all of that data that connected online to in dealership. And so when we launched it, it worked. Lots of people got interested. The manufacturers, especially, the GMs, the Toyotas, Nissans, and so on, they were really interested because they really wanted to understand what moved a consumer to go and purchase their vehicle. And then all of the companies that were interested in that started lining up, and ultimately we sold that business.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, how do you see, because you've had experience in mature businesses, helping them and growing and being very strategic, but also in the startups. How has your experience in the business world really prepared you for being executive director? So leading the legacy builders, which are your top givers in your church at 12 Stone, successful business people. How has that helped you? Because church world and business world, two different things. Right. I mean, it's like, I'd always tell pastors, you speak in one language, that business person speak an entirely different language. But how has the experience in the business world prepared you in your role at 12 Stone leading legacy builders?
It's funny, they are different, but I believe that the values are really the same. And what we've used to build a great connection to our legacy team members. And there are things like building trust. So talking about what we did in the auto industry with manufacturers, I had to go in and I had to build a trust between the manufacturers, the dealerships, that were in their portfolio and what we were doing with the consumers. Because if they didn't trust us, they would have never opened up, the data kimono where we were connecting to consumers and driving them to do an action. And I think the way that we communicated and over communicated really helped with building that trust. And at the end of the day, we had to show some kind of value. We had to show an ROI for what we were doing and be transparent in the way that we were doing that. So, those 3 or 4 values that I just mentioned are the values that we use with our Legacy Builders program and connecting to our legacy team members.
So what would you say, like, what should a business, because there are business people that are in our churches, even in Highlands, and we try to be extremely intentional. And I know you guys are very intentional. There are people on the peripheral, they're struggling to try and find their place. They don't fit in the normal box because they're out there traveling, they're trying to build their business. They can't do the normal checklist that some people have or most people have in churches. And so really they give and they're showing up to Sunday service, but there's still an unfulfillment that's inside of them. And because they haven't really tapped into this spiritual gift of how God's created them. And then where do I go and express that? I really believe that business people, when they don't find their place inside the context of a local church, they go create their own. And I think that's what's driven major philanthropy. I think that when they never really found their place inside the church, but they have this hardwired thing inside them that they can create wealth, but they want to be generous. And there's not a place many times for things that they're passionate about. Now, the pastor sets the vision, but the business person sets the pace of it. And so that's why it's so important bringing those two worlds together. But what should a business person who's struggling to find their fulfillment or even purpose in the local church, what should that next step? So I'm new, I'm in your church, or I've been there for a long time, but what's my next step to finding fulfillment inside the church?
I will tell you, it is a great question that everyone should ask themselves within the church, especially business people. And I can tell you what worked for us. And it was simple, and yet it's profound. We said yes. We said yes from the very beginning. And so I'll give you an example. Lonnie and me, we're by nature, we're introverts. We're not going to go and plug in into areas that we're somewhat uncomfortable with. But we said yes to a very simple ask of, we started out in volunteering at 12 Stone at serving coffee. We had our little coffee station that was by the elementary and middle school areas of the entrance of our church. And it was the most uncomfortable thing that we could have said yes to. But what happened to us is we started serving people, and more importantly, seeing them when they came in, and everyone's in a different place when they come into church on a Sunday morning. And I will tell you, it changed our heart towards people and then opened us up to having conversations with people we would have never done, whether they're in different age groups or different ethnic backgrounds or wherever they were. We were there because we simply said yes, which then led us to start ushering. And then when we opened up multiple campuses, it gave us the freedom to go and pioneer at a new campus and set up the usher team there, and then lead small groups, and then be a part of a year-long ministry where they pour into men within our church called Joshua's Men. And these constant saying yeses, even when it was painful, uncomfortable, big commitments, all of those things ultimately led us, Lee, to where we are today, for sure.
You just defined, and this is what I love about you, and anybody who knows you knows that you're a strong leader, but you have a submitted heart. And your wife's probably like mine, even a better leader, but as well. But I've watched you, and what you've modeled and what you're modeling is you just went all in. You went all in, and you experienced so many aspects of your church. And remember, it's the journey that makes you. God doesn't waste anything. And so you just said, yes, yeah, I'll serve in that. Yeah, it was uncomfortable. Yeah, maybe even been beneath me, but I'm going to do it because I'm going to just immerse myself inside serving at the church. And it gave you some experience and visibility into the various aspects of your church, so that as you're now in a leadership role, significant leadership role, you've experienced those things. So it helps you become a better leader. I remember, David, when I moved from Baton Rouge to Birmingham to volunteer at Highlands, and for that first year, and they talked about Growth Track, which is a simulation process to help you discover your purpose and find your place and know more about the church. And I looked at the guy who he was, let's say, my oversight or whatever. And he says, everyone goes through Growth Track. And I'm like, oh, I got this. I don't need to do that. I was like, I got this. I ain't going through Growth Track. I'm not going to invest 3 Sundays, an hour a Sunday or 4 Sundays. I said, I got that. I'm good. And he looked at me, and we ended the meeting, and the next 2 days, I felt this heaviness, and it was like I was praying. It's like God was trying to teach me something, saying, how are you going to lead unless you've experienced, like, you're going to lead people and have people, you're going to tell them to go through these different things, and you haven't gone through it. Yeah. And so I remember going through it, and it was like an aha moment. I had spiritual gifts that I did not know I really had, but were deep and passionate about, but didn't know. It just affirmed so many different things. I got to understand the inner workings of the church and the vision Pastor Chris has, and how we manage, what we do with money, and how we do what we do with missions and outreach, just all of it. And it was just kind of an aha moment. And I think many pastors, both the business person saying yes, but pastors giving them an on-ramp and a runway actually to do that. And, because you're a rare bird in the fact that you guys, as an introvert, you guys rose above that and said, you know what, this is going to be uncomfortable, but we know it's right. And I think the best way we can help people is first connecting with them and at where they are. Jesus didn't tell the disciples, come in my office and let's kind of figure out if we're going to do life together. And here's my autographed pictures with God. And it's a beautiful office of gold and all this stuff. He's like, no. He says, Peter, let's go fishing. So he met them where they were at. And, which leads to my next question. Would love your insight on it. But what do you think pastors need to understand about business people to help them engage in the local church?
I think business people want to be in the know. They want to know what's going on. So, you just talked about Growth Track, and really that gives you some insight and access to what's happening. And I think that business people want that because they're used to that, right? They're used to that access and used to having that information accessible to them. And so sometimes when people go into the church and they haven't done the yeses and they haven't gone through all of that, then they feel like they're not a part of what's really happening behind the scenes. And so for me, I can only speak for myself and conversations that we've had with our legacy team members. When that happens, when they get to have real conversations and real access, that's what changes. I see it changes people in the business world. And so I would land there and say that that's probably the best thing that they could ever do.
Yeah. I think my pastor, my pastor's greatest gift to me was giving me access to his world. Now, I'm not saying that, so all you pastors that are listening, I'm not saying that you get open access and your cell number to every single business person in your church. You couldn't sustain that. I mean, you really couldn't. But I think what you tapped into, David, and what you're talking about, I think when business people feel a part, Pastor Chris says it in this way. He says, people want to be needed and they want to be known. And to give them a place to serve that really, pastors need to understand, look, that business person, their spiritual gift, if it's generosity, then that's actually tied to what they do Monday through Friday. And so they may not be able to come to Wednesday night service, and that needs to be okay. We need to affirm them in their calling as a marketplace person. That's like, it's a calling that's equally as important as the calling that's on your life as a senior pastor. It's their ministry expression. It just happens to be Monday through Friday. And I think when we empower them, first equip them, give them a lane to run in. When we empower them, I think it brings fulfillment, because a business person can bring influence and they can bring resources, but what the pastor can do is set the stage to have that business person gain fulfillment. And so many of them lack that. They've built these empires, but they lack real fulfillment. You know, as you guys with legacy builders, and I've heard some of these, but why don't you share? It would be great for churches, that pastors that are listening, or business people that are listening, that if you don't have a legacy builders or a legacy team or a kingdom builders ministry at your church, you need to have one. You have a worship team. You wouldn't ever do church without a worship team. Well, this is no different. God's called everybody to be a worshiper, but some people have a gift for it. That would be your worship team. God's called everyone to be generous, but some people have a gift for it. Romans 12, 6-8. Your spiritual gifts. Well, the spiritual gift of giving, it needs a lane. It needs a team to be able to serve in that ministry expression. And so there's, some of maybe the not only best practices, but why don't you share maybe one or two stories of impact when you guys implemented Legacy Builders that now is accelerating vision at 12 Stone?
Well, I mean, there are so many that I could walk through. I'll give you one real quick one that has to do with the giving side, and then I'll give you another one that was just a complete shocker and surprise that came out of just legacy team members' heart. So the first one around giving is just, there's sometimes when you think that you set the bar high and in an ask, and then God just laughs at you and says, we're going to go a little bit higher. And so we have this amazing local ministry partner in Bearings Bike Works that I've been associated with for years. But we took a group of legacy team members down there, and we cast vision on what we wanted to do to serve the kids on the west side of Atlanta and making it safer for them to get to Bearings, because they're in a neighborhood that's tough on the best day. And then you add the challenges of the rail systems and the roads and people driving like crazy, and these kids are trying to get there on their bikes, and it's maddening. And so I'll shorten the story and tell you that we needed a bridge that would connect them to the bike trail that was right next to it. It was 50 feet away, but it might as well have been 500 miles away, because there was no way to get there within a mile. And we just said, what if we were able to take care of this, because we heard this need while we were there. And before the end of the night, the money was raised like that, and people's hearts were filled. And this great organization that we have been connected to at 12 Stone since its infancy was taken care of in a time where it probably would have taken months or a year to go and do a fundraise like that.
Yeah, so they really accelerated the vision of that to provide the trail to get people. So
it was amazing.
So what was the and I love, everything you guys do. You don't do it just to provide a trail. You don't do it just to provide a bike. You don't just do it to provide a meal. You do it in Jesus' name. And that's really the difference at the church's position. We want to deal with the physical need, right? And then also bring the spiritual at some point. How have you seen business leaders that are currently at 12 Stone, have you seen them really fulfill their purpose inside the church?
Well, I've seen them decide to give not only of their money, but their time and their effort. So, we do a lot of different things that connect our legacy team members to what we're doing. We don't legacy is not a campaign, right? Legacy is an ongoing entity, just that continues to set great vision and to communicate what those gaps are, so that our people come alongside and participate, and we keep them connected, through communication of our quarterly lane reports and all of our campus gatherings and all these things. But I'll tell you the thing that I'm just blown away with in the participation is we have opened up to these volunteer experiences. I just mentioned what we did with Barron's. We took 22 people down there who raised their hand that said, look, not only do I love giving, but I want to go down and see what's happening there. So tell me where my money's going and how it's being spent, and show me the ROI, right? They didn't say these things, but by their actions, this is exactly what they want. And so we've had almost 150 legacy team members go to some experience like this. And it just blows me away, because I'll share another quick story with you that wasn't a funding effort. It was just being at the right place at the right time. We have amazing business people, right, in legacy team that have all kinds of different skills. And we had a couple that ended up going to a high school. We took 4 couples, this was crazy, to a high school retreat offsite. And long story short is she connected with some of our volunteers that are in our residency program. These are residents that we're training up to be ministers, right? They're getting their masters and they're going to, go into worship ministry or other types of ministry. And so she connected in that night, then asked to go to our resident meeting, volunteer experience, connected with 3 residents, and now is mentoring all 3 of those residency students in a way that we could have never, ever thought to connect them with. But because of the access and because of all of these things that we've done, we're now being able to resource, our people, and they get filled up. If you were to talk to that legacy team member, she gets way more out of it than what she thinks that she puts into the 3. But if you talk to the 3 residents, they're just enamored with her and the wisdom that she brings to them.
Yeah. So, it's amazing when you invest, when you give your life away, you gain such a fulfillment that you don't have. It's kind of, this whole upstream, downstream model. You get wisdom from an upstream, but then you get fulfillment when you give that away to a downstream. Perfect example is your residents. You mentioned something of them seeing the impact, like actually going, seeing and experiencing it. And I think many times we show videos and we show impact on the ground in some foreign country, or maybe just right down the street in a rough neighborhood where we're feeding people or we're making an impact. But if they actually physically go on and see it. So I love the fact that you guys do this. We do it as well, as creating experiences where they can actually go touch, taste, feel what's happening on the ground, where their investment dollars are making a difference. You will change the person's perspective that's actually giving. You want to move that person from seeing what they're doing as an expense to seeing it as an investment. See, my giving, Laura and our giving is not an expense. We don't look at it and say, okay, our giving's an expense. No. It's an investment. And when you have investment mentality versus an expense mentality, which really is a scarcity mindset, because you're looking at what you're expending, something's going out of me, rather than no, I'm imparting something that's going to make a difference. So it's a legacy mindset that's saying, no, this is an investment that I'm making. Now, the return on it may not always be financial, but it certainly will be in the kingdom, and it'll certainly be rewards involved, in heaven, and life impact. It's really people impact, right?
Amen.
One strong suit that you guys have, at 12 Stone is your frequent communication with your legacy builders. I've seen, material that you guys have created, and, I love how you guys are running the play with, vision gap. And for those of you who don't know what vision gap is most pastors speak on what they want to do. And instead of really speaking to vision gap, vision gap is, here's what we're going to do as a church, and here's what we have, but then here's what we could do if. And when you have a mindset and you're communicating vision of what you could do if, everything changes. Because now you don't know who God's going to speak to in a certain area. And again, he gives seed to the sower, not seed to the keeper. And so it's a mindset of saying, wow, this vision gap, and you guys have done a phenomenal job. I've seen your communication and how you're posting, whether it's devotionals or whether it's communicating out through the teaching videos. You guys just are really intentional. What would you tell us about your strategy and other best practices that you've learned to help not only build legacy builders, but sustain it? Because you guys have momentum right now.
Yeah, and we're fortunate to have that momentum. I'll tell you though, before I even talked about considering this role, which is also a fun story between you and I had some hurdles to overcome in thinking about this role, because our church we'd had a couple failed attempts at bringing, people like me together. And I know this because I was in those different iterations, right? Those different groups.
You experienced it.
I did. And so I saw just to be blunt, failures of that, where they were very campaign based, not communicating all the things. And earlier we talked about the values that I had in business, and it was building trust and over communicating and, showing value and being transparent when you do all this. And I remember coming over and spending time with you before I took this role. Yeah. And I heard and saw all of the things that Church of the Highlands had built, and they matched up identically with those values. And I said, well, if we're going to do this, this is the way it has to be. Like, it's non-negotiable. And so we literally templated the things that we saw as successful in the way that you and Pastor Chris built out your, the way that you communicate, the way that you connect, the way that you got away from campaigning. Like, you never used those words with me, but I could tell you, like, that was never a part
we don't
of
do
what
that.
we, right. It's silly. And so, we have actually adopted the words "what if," because
that's great.
If we do the things like connecting through our quarterly reports, which as business leaders, we almost expect. As shareholders, we almost expect, right? And so why wouldn't we expect that?
It's great.
In the way that we, build this community. And so, having that and having campus gatherings where we're continuing to communicate our values and share experiences, and then the vision dinners, become a celebration and a position of like, hey, we're setting the bar high. Like, we've done some pretty crazy stuff, but that bar, like, God just laughs at it when we set it like here, right?
Yeah.
And we do that. And then I think the foundation of trust within our legacy teams has definitely come through the volunteer experiences. Because when I go back and personally look at all of the times we said yes, when we were giving over and above the tithe to these organizations, they let me have access. And I said yes to go and see what we were doing and how we were doing it. And I'm like, I want to give that to our people. And so when you have the consistency of communication, you're transparent, you show value, all of that stuff, that's how you're going to fast track, a group like this within your church, period.
Yeah, that's great. So good. So good. I love the fact that you guys are asking, what if? And when you have that what if mindset, even challenges that come about, what the opportunities does this afford us to do? even in a tough dynamic. And I love how the consistency of communication, we do it in the business world every day. You can't manage what you don't measure, as Peter Drucker said, but it's to be able to have consistent communication all throughout the year of what we're doing, what we could do if, and also sharing how we're making an impact, because it's the outcomes that justify more new vision getting done. And you guys, making just a tremendous impact. Let's move to kind of what really is something near and dear to me because I believe God, family, and your mission. So, God first, family first, your mission first, and then that really creates your legacy. And of course, God is ultimately supreme, center, and first. But I think when you create your family being first with mission and kind of all tying it together, because I think they're all tied. I think when our relationship with God and our family and our mission is all priority, I think that God really puts a grace on it and brings them kind of all together. I've seen that in my own life, but we often talk about purpose and legacy being about God, family, mission, but it's not always easy to keep our priorities straight. My journey with the Lord was not a straight line, David. It was bobbing and weaving but you're married now. You've got adult children. I think you have 2 grands. Is that right?
Yep,
2 grands. So 2 grandchildren. Tell us about your family. How do you keep the Metter family a priority? You're a super intentional guy. I've seen it firsthand. And then what have you learned through the years?
Well, it's tough. As you know, as your kids start to become adults, right? You hope and pray that you've raised your kids, that when they become adults, you want to be friends with them. And so thankfully, in our case, as they become adults, we're still friends with our kids. And they range from the age of 31 down to our twins that are 19, and they're in college. So they're mostly away from home, right? So we're empty nesters. It's hard because as you have a 30-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 27-year-old, a 24-year-old, I'm getting all the ages right, hopefully, and 2 19-year-olds trying to get together, you have to be super intentional. And so, I'll give you an example of 2022, we were super intentional in creating a home base, no matter where it is. We create experiences and travel because we love to travel. And we did it 4 different times during the year. And we invite the family in, they come in, and we are super intentional in spending quality time together in doing that. And we just came off of our winter time where we have our family meeting where my wife and I are super transparent. We talk about like where our heart is. We have certain, again, values in our family, things that we will do, things that we will not do. We're not a bank, but we help our kids in the sense of paying for college, setting up our grandkids with 529 so that our kids don't have to go in debt for that. And so there's a number of different things that we do intentional, but then like we ask hard questions. I mean, with our family meeting this year, there are some specific questions that bring out some things, but because we love each other and we respect each other, it gives us permission to have those conversations, which makes us even tighter so that in 2023, when we have our first fun trip, all of those memories and all of the things that, we worked hard for in this last one will show up and pay off,
That's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And, there's nothing like, and you're right. It is hard, but man, the dividends that it pays when, I don't know who this was. I heard someone I don't know if it was a podcast or just a reel. It was some executive who's been very successful. And he said, really, success is going to be defined, he goes, as I've gotten older, that my kids still want to be like with me. Like they still want to hang out. They still want to. And so as we get older, that's just like super important. Of course, my grandkids, I want them to think I'm the coolest thing on the planet. Because, my answer is like it is at church. My answer is yes.
Yes.
I want to give them whatever they want. But with our kids, as they're growing older and married and, have in-laws and all of that, it can make it taxing. And it doesn't have to be extravagant, but we have to be intentional in setting places up where we can have discussion. And I'd encourage every one of the listeners, if you haven't set values for your family, I really challenge you to do so. Doesn't matter how it start, just simply get them together and let it be collaborative. Let the values be collaborative, not dictated to where, go ahead.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'll tell you the other thing, that because as our kids start moving into different parts of the country, communication becomes tough. And then intentionality communication becomes tough. And people turn to social in a lot of different ways. We're not a social family, but we use we call it internal social networking, where we use apps like Marco Polo, where we can communicate within the family unit, no matter where they are, and they see our faces and they see our the personalities that, especially with our grandkids, we can sit there and see that. That's another example of intentionality in doing that and spending time, even when they're all the way across the country.
Yeah. But that intentionality, I think what it does is it creates a closeness, a oneness. And even when you do have tough issues that you talk about, but working through those issues really can bond the relationships even greater. But not having those discussions and not really having a values plan that says, this is what we value, because the world's going to try and dictate their values.
Yes.
And so let's try to give them something better that they were a part of speaking into. And integrity. Well, why? Generosity. Why? And they need to understand the why behind that. And so when we have 9 values as a family. And when we put that together, it was very collaborative. And I have a propensity to kind of take over the discussion and kind of dictate to my kids. And man, it was like, my wife was like, she was telling me, you can't do that. And I'm like, and God was really convicting me. And I was like, so I just kind of, I didn't even say anything about generosity as even being a value. And then we had 8. And so I finally said to the group, hey, so our 8, we're good with those? Is that all our values? And I'm sitting there going, I'm the legacy pastor at Church of the Highlands, and no one in my family saying generosity. And so I'm like, when we're very generous. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then my daughter-in-law, London, goes, wait, hang on, duh. She goes, duh, Dad, really? Generosity. And I'm like, is it one of ours? And I'm like, thank God for London. And I said, but why is it? And so it's really important to structure that. And then what happens is you don't have compliant kids. You have kids that are part of the process and have really taken ownership of it. And that's when we see, I think, great fruit. All right. We're coming kind of to the close, but you had a great idea for Christmas gifts and teaching your children really about the heart of generosity. And how did your kids, I want you to share with our listeners the story of Christmas gifts. And then I have some questions. I want to know how your kids responded, to that. And you got to unpack that for our listeners.
Yep. So we were fortunate to just be at the right place at the right time in a conversation when someone was talking about donor advised funds, and we latched onto it, and we set up our own donor advised fund. We give out of that. We love it. It's an amazing thing. So much so that I actually brought it to our legacy team members in our last group of campus gatherings. I was shocked, Lee, that we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of our legacy team members, big givers, had no idea what a donor advised fund was. And during that cycle, I went, man, how do you educate people? And I always believe education starts at home, right? And I'm like, well, my own kids don't know what a donor advised fund is. And so we had this crazy idea, and we went back to NCF, where we have our donor advised fund, and said, hey, what if we set up these donor advised funds and funded them for our kids as a Christmas gift. They were shocked and surprised. They're like, this is the greatest thing ever. So we set these up, and we were super intentional about keeping it secret until the first night that we were together on our Christmas vacation trip. And we knew that we had our family meeting 2 nights in. So on that first night at dinner, I started talking about Lonnie and my road to generosity in 2022, and then set it up and said, and this is what we'd like to do for you as a Christmas present. Let them know that we had set up a donor advised fund, gave them their username, passwords that evening, and said, we'd like for you over the next 2 days to be really thoughtful, talk about intentionality of where you would like to give your first gift. So during our family meeting, we'll start off by going around the room, and each one of you will say, this is what I investigated. This is who I want to give to. This is the amount. And you'll be able to push the button, literally push the button on your phone and be able to give that first gift. And so you hope that they're going to go and do that, and then we got to the night of our family meeting, and it exceeded every expectation that Lonnie and I had. They were so intentional about talking about who they picked, why. There were stories, quite honestly, that I cannot share, why they picked a certain organization because of something even in their personal life and background that happened. And it just blew us away, things that we didn't even know about our own kids. And those stories were just such great opportunities for each one of us to connect and learn a little bit more about each other. But then just the joy that when they hit that button and everybody applauded, it was just so cool. And so they may have the spiritual gift of giving, they may not. But in that moment, nobody, the way that our family bonded together was just amazing.
Yeah. There's nothing like what generosity will do, I think, in a person who's actually extending it. Well, what encouragement as we close, what encouragement or advice would you give? There are people listening that actually are either leading a kingdom builder, legacy builders type ministry initiative at their church. What would you share, or even some pastors, what advice would you give them? One, if they haven't built this ministry or they're in the beginning stages, what advice? There may be some fears and hangups that happen. I know you walked through some of that. I remember meeting you in my office the first day, and you're like, all right, what is this? As any business person's like, what are you asking of me? How much is it going to cost? What time is it going to take? And what are you asking of me? And, but what would you share, any advice in your journey with any pastors or people who are either starting or trying to start a legacy builder kind of ministry?
Well, first I would say yes to it, right? That's easy. And then seek wisdom, because I will tell you, just in my own personal journey, having you as kind of the home base to go back to each time where I can seek wisdom so that I don't have to go and step on 4 or 5 different landmines is invaluable, right? And I would tell, I think, another piece of advice, maybe my last piece of advice for a pastor who's either doing this and they don't feel like it's growing the way they want, or they haven't done this, is have that business person come alongside you, because the way that you communicate has great value, but in partnership with that business leader, you can do so much more. And we have definitely seen that in our walk over the last year and a half.
No, that's so good. One of the things is actually my son's idea, and people can get this whether through growleader.com or go to the kingdombuilders.us site. But we created a whole virtual intensive now that, I was traveling, helping churches, and and that's kind of a limited model, honestly, because you can only travel so much. And but we created really a whole intensive virtually, which teaches people not only how to start a legacy team, Kingdom Builders ministry, but how to sustain it. And it's several hours, but it's quite intense. It's a lot of information. But then when they go through it, and Pastor Chris, actually, he and I tag team some of it as well. He's got 40 years worth of ministry experience. It's got great perspective. And so it's he and I tag teaming on it. But then when they're done, they get a strategic plan, and it has all the information, all the templates. You talked about lane reports and communication. It unpacks all of that for them. And so if you're a pastor of a large church, small church, it doesn't matter the size of the church, and desire implementing that team, or really maybe yours is anemic and you need to breathe new life into it. That's a resource that you can find and get as well. All right. I always end, David, and you may not be ready for this question, but I'm going to hit you between the eyes with it, is because to me, it's one of the most unanswered questions when I ask people. A lot of people, they just can't simply answer it. But at the end of each episode, I always ask guests, what do you want your legacy to be?
Wow. It's a tough one. Well, Lonnie and I talk a lot just about our family in what is important to us as a legacy is to take all of the generational sin and turn it, and for us to be facilitating this and changing that to generational love. And so that's a simple one I can give you. Here's the real one, honestly. Because I have this, I have this vision that comes up quite often in my devotionals. And I think, without getting emotional, I think, when I leave this earth and I get to go see Jesus, he looks at me and goes, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." That's it.
That's powerful.
That's my hope.
Yeah. When we stand before him, nothing else matters. That's powerful. Well, my brother, thank you so much for your time, and tell Lonnie hello, and all that you shared, I think, is just so helpful. You guys are doing, and you specifically, doing incredible work for the kingdom. I'm cheering you guys on, and pray for you guys, and be sure and tell Pastor Kevin and Pastor Jason, hey, and just love what you guys are doing. And if anyone's ever around Atlanta area, check out 12 Stone Church. Just an amazing church. Love y'all so much. And I think this episode is going to help a bunch of people. So thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners, both pastors, business people, could be college students. Thank you for joining us on the Legacy Starts Today podcast. If you're interested in starting a legacy team or Kingdom Builders ministry, check out our website at kingdombuilders.us. You can track us on socials at kingdombuilders.us as well. You can check out our new virtual option, as I mentioned, but there's lots of tools and strategies. Also, too, if you'd like to have Pastor Chris be involved as well, you can check out our growleader.com website. Tremendous resources for churches, where we're actually taking our Grow Leader initiative to churches around the country. And so there's regional events as well as our annual conference. But if you're a business leader wanting to dig in more ways to make an impact, there are also some great books and resources at those various sites. So thanks again, David, and all those of who tuned in. We'll catch you on the next episode. And remember, your legacy starts today.
To learn more, follow us on social media at kingdombuilders.us. And join us next time for Legacy Starts Today with Lee Domingue.